So today we're going to be back in Luke chapter 7. We're going to go through verses 1 through 10. So Luke 7, 1 through 10, and I've entitled the message today, Willing to Risk It All. And that's a great question, I believe. What are we willing to risk for Jesus? What are we willing to give up for the Lord? Is it our time? Is it our finances? What is it that we will give up for the Lord? Because we get comfortable. We do, all the time. Get very comfortable. I remember a story of Spurgeon says this. He says, "We may feel proud that so many men are forthcoming who, for the sake of preaching the gospel of Christ, are willing to leave lucrative callings and endure hardship." I think of Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who in 1927 left his practice as a medical doctor to become a preacher. He was alongside great men like G. Campbell Morgan. And so it's easy when you think about those things. Well, it's not always easy, but what are you willing to risk for Jesus? What are you willing to give up for the Lord? And not only that, where's our faith? Where is faith in the Lord that He's going to do what He's telling us He will do? Where do we establish our faith? Where do we have our faith? I think about that a lot. And I know that we claim to have our faith in Christ as Christ followers. But I think a lot of times we have our faith in our complacency. We have our faith in our comfort zones. We have our faith where we're comfortable. We don't like to get outside of that box that we are always in. We don't like to get outside and roam. It's uncomfortable for us. It's like going to our house after work or just during the day, and we get home and we think about it and we put our comfortable clothes on and, our comfortable sweats on. I know for me, and we just let it all hang out and just chill. And we have our potato chips, our popcorn, or whatever. Why? Because in our little cocoon, nobody can judge us. Nobody can tell us, well, our spouses can and our kids can, but nobody can tell us really anything to make us feel uncomfortable. Nobody's going to criticize us. Nobody's going to really do any of those things. We're comfortable in that little cocoon. And so we're not willing to risk anything for Jesus. We don't want to get outside of that comfort zone. And I think that in these verses that we're going to read, that we see men willing to risk it all. We see men willing to risk, or people willing to risk their livelihood, willing to risk what other people will think of them, willing to risk their positions in life. We're going to talk about a centurion. We're going to see him as a shepherd in a way. And we're going to see him and people telling us that he's deserving of special attention for particular reasons. And then we're going to see true faith and what true faith looks like. True faith's appearance. So, chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Let's take those verses first. Actually, let's read through verse 10, and then we'll begin our message. And it says, "Now when he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." Then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him. And he turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick. We are comfortable, and our faith is comfortable in that little cocoon, isn't it? That's where we're comfortable. That's where all of our faith usually lies for us. And we usually don't want to risk anything and go outside that box. So Jesus finishes the Beatitudes. He finishes talking about loving your enemies, not judging other people. And now he enters into Capernaum here. And we see the centurion. We see the servant. And the servant that he has is near death. This servant was entimos to him. He was precious to him. He was very precious to him. Now, let's think about that for a moment with the centurion. Because this is a Roman soldier. This is a non-commissioned officer who commanded at least 100 men. Now, the Romans at that time, they divided legions into 10 units called cohorts. And in those cohorts, they had 6 contingents called centuries, which were with 100 men in each of them. And then the centurions were over those centuries. They were career soldiers. They were considered from the middle class. They served as the backbone of the infantry. They were like your drill sergeants. They were like, just your drill sergeants, the backbone. They took care of everything. One commentator writes, as drill sergeants, they trained the men in their own century and led them into battle. They had to account for the equipment that belonged to the century. For this, they had the help of 2 clerks. They also posted guards and made inspections. So they had to take care of every aspect of life for these guys. They, in a way, had to teach them how to fight, teach them how to battle, make sure they had all the equipment that they needed for all of this to happen, make sure they were there and ready and prepared for every task that they were to accomplish. And so naturally, what would come with that? Care and concern for people. Wouldn't you think? They would care for that battalion. They would care for that cohort. They would care for that century. They would care for those 100 men. And when they're in battle, making sure that everybody is placed in the right positions. That's what they were to do. And in the Bible, centurions, we see them in 3 different places. And every time, they're in a positive light in the Bible. It's amazing. They're career men, while those they were in charge of were draftees, auxiliaries, very anti-Semitic people. But the Roman centurions were known not to be, they were unbiased. And so they had this special heart about them for some reason. That's what they looked for. So we see in Acts chapter 10, we see a centurion named Cornelius. You guys remember him? From Caesarea. This is when Cornelius, sent his servants over to Peter in Joppa, right? They're in Joppa. And then what happens? He calls Peter over. Peter goes. And Peter says, look, I shouldn't be here because, you're a Gentile. And God had told him in that vision, don't call what I call clean unclean. And so he goes to them. And then what ends up happening? He shares the gospel with these Gentiles, this centurion, and everybody in his household gets saved. They come to know the Lord. This was the first time the gospel was shared with the Gentiles. That was a centurion. That was because his heart was open. And then we see in Luke 23, verse 47, Jesus is up on the cross. Jesus breathes his last breath. And what does that centurion at the bottom of the cross say in Luke 23, 47? It says, so when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, certainly this was a righteous man. So these guys had very receptive, open, shepherding types of hearts. And it's important to know these things because it sets up the whole picture for what we're going to talk about. Then we have this servant, it tells us in these verses. This servant, to us, okay, we understand what a servant might be, but it's even more than that. It's doulos, meaning slave. He was a slave. And this slave had no rights. That's how it was in this society. The economy of classical Greece and imperial Rome was built upon slavery, on slave labor. And it was very unusual for a Roman to have such a close relationship with a slave. One person writes, there was a Roman writer who said that every year a man should take stock of his possessions and should hold on to that which is still producing and beneficial, and should get rid of that which was no longer productive. This included slaves. They could be just thrown out. Their life had no value. Their heartbeat had no value at all. They were just thrown out, and they were expected to be killed. Listen to this. It's been said under Roman law, a master had the right to kill his slave, and it was expected that he would do so if the slave became ill or injured to the point where he could not work. So he was expected, this Roman centurion had a servant, a slave who had no rights in their society. He was expected to put this guy to death. And yet he shows this unordinary love towards somebody, even a non-Jewish man showing this kind of love. And we know through this, he's already an unordinary non-Jewish man. His heart, because he's that type of a guy, he's open, he's receptive. His heart is not fallow ground, but is toiled. It's open. And sometimes God uses those things in our lives to get our attention. We were talking the other day, I heard somebody last week, I think you were talking about Reuben, and he's a big baby, big chion, right? When it comes to family, that's how my father-in-law is too. When it comes to family, their hearts are receptive. Big tough guys on the outside, like this Roman soldier. Big tough guys. But when it comes to people that they love and care about, their hearts are just completely open and receptive. And that's when Jesus comes walking in. Prepared now. I love that. God uses those things in certain people's lives to get attention because of softened hearts, open, receptive, tough on the outside, but broken on the inside. And Jesus can use that to his advantage because the heart is prepared and the heart is ready. And if you get somebody in that type of position, what happens to everybody underneath? It impacts their life in one way or another. And it's a great picture. Here we have a Roman soldier assigned to the Jews of oppression. And he's standing in the gap for somebody that doesn't even matter in the world's eyes. Isn't this guy, this Roman centurion, isn't he living out what Jesus just taught in the Beatitudes? In loving your enemies? It's amazing how Jesus was teaching, and this guy is, and then right in the next picture in the book of Luke, we're getting it right before our eyes of what he is talking about. It's displayed right before us. And this guy is willing to reach out to Jesus for help. And think about it. He's risking all of his relationships with the Jews that he's already established and the Romans, his position. Right? He's not supposed to care about these people. He's risking all of that. He's risking his reputation. And I think about that. How am I willing to risk my reputation for the Lord? For somebody else? To reach out to somebody else? Or am I afraid of what they might think of me? or my past? Do they know? Do they know of the things that I've done? Will they even be attentive? Will they even listen? Does it really matter? Or will they think I'm just some weirdo now? Does it matter? Am I willing to risk my reputation? I hope so. I hope I am. So, we come to verses 3 through 5, and let's just recap. It says, so when he heard about Jesus, the centurion, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. You see here, this guy has a special heart for the Jewish nation for some reason. He's perplexed, don't you think? I propose to you that this guy is perplexed, and he's wondering what to do in his desperation. He's been trained all his life for battle. He's been trained all his life to work out the possibilities, to work through the problem. He's been trained to do that, but now he doesn't know what to do. Now he's at his wit's end. He's a Roman. He's a tough guy. They don't bow down to anybody. But now he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to cure this guy. And he'll do anything now for that cure. He's willing to do anything. And he hears of Jesus. And we think, well, how did he hear about Jesus? I mean, was he walking around the compound and some of the soldiers were talking about what was going on with Jesus? Was he there with his slave as he's laying there sick, almost dying, and were people standing behind him telling him, hey, I wonder if that guy Jesus can help? And he just gets a thought, you know what? I'm at my wit's end. What do I do? And somebody took the opportunity to share with him about Jesus. In whatever way, something happened where he heard about Jesus. And so he decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to send these elders of the Jews to plead with him. Why? Well, in Matthew 8, 5 through 13, we see kind of a contradiction here. Because in Matthew, it tells us that the centurion's friends, or that he went directly. Here it's telling us that he sent others directly. But there's no contradiction, because at that time it was traditional to send messengers ahead of you to deliver a message, and it was just like you were doing it yourself. So Luke is just simply saying, hey, look, it was Jesus and he was just sending elders. But I wonder if this centurion, out of respect, did that obviously, but did he think maybe that they had some special in with Jesus? Well, he's a Jew, they're Jews. I think it would make sense. Maybe it would be better if they go on my behalf. We stick together, la raza, something like that. And then they were told that they begged Jesus. And what does that mean? They summoned him. They invited him. They pleaded with him. They urged him to come. And they said that he was deserving. Why was he deserving? Are any of us deserving? Nobody's deserving. But they say, look, Jesus, he's deserving because he loves our nation. And he built us a synagogue. Look what he's done for us. He's deserving of this thing. Well, nobody's deserving. Why would they think he would be deserving? I mean, what if he didn't build that synagogue? What if he didn't do anything? Would we just still love our neighbors and love our enemies? Well, I propose to you that these Jews were thinking about Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Let's turn to Genesis. It's the first book of the Bible. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And it says this: Now the Lord had said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And listen to this. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So could it be that they were remembering this promise? And they thought, well, this man blessed us. We know, God, that if somebody blesses us, well, then you're going to bless them right back. So you know what? Lord, he's deserving of this because he blessed us. So would you bless him? You know, a lot of times when we talk about faith, man, if we appeal to God's name, I think sometimes people just appeal to his name, but they don't appeal to his will and don't submit to his will. We have to appeal to his name, and then we have to submit to his will. You know, the Lord in the book of Ezekiel, it says that God will do things because of his name, for his name's sake. Over and over it says that. I will do it for my name's sake. So when we're praying and we appeal to the Lord's name, Father, in your name I ask you to do this. But if it's your will, it has to be both. It can't just be, I claim this in Jesus. I claim this in God's name. No, is that the Lord's will too? So you have to appeal to his name and his will. Whatever you want, Lord, I pray this in Jesus' name. Again, we are seeing great humility in this centurion, this non-Jew, this Roman soldier, and such great faith in the Lord. Jews were Roman subjects. He would have to be a sign of strength to them and in front of them, wouldn't he? He would have to be that way in front of them. They were trained again to be self-sufficient, to work through the problems. That's what when we watch that show, Evan and I watch that show, Navy SEALs, they always say that. Work through the problem. There's a huge problem going on, work through it. Somebody got lost, don't worry about that guy. He's going to work through the problem. And he's going to get back to us. That's what they were trained to do, work through the problem. But he couldn't work through the problem. When it came to life and death, he had no control over that. And now he's broken. And this is when Jesus does his best work in us, isn't it? Not by power, not by might, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. When we are at our weakest, that's when we're the strongest, the Bible tells us. So if you're feeling strong today, take heed. Because you can be humbled really quick. Really quick. But if you're feeling broken, then he's paying special attention to you. Special attention, the Bible tells us. Now, I'm not telling you to go out of here and be broken. But remember the Lord. Be humble. Let's read verses 6 through 10. Back in Luke chapter 7. It says, Then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick. He had been restored. So Jesus goes with them. And we get to see true faith and true faith's appearance. What does it look like in our lives? Jesus goes with them. Now this would have been unheard of for a Jew, just like with Peter and the other centurion. This would have been unheard of for a Jew. But Jesus is not worried about appearances, is he? He's not worried about sitting down with sinners. He pays special attention to sinners. That's why he came. He has compassion for others, whether they are friends or whether they are enemies, and he's putting everything that he already taught in the Beatitudes into action right before us, right in the very next scene. I love this saying, compassion does not measure, it ministers. Compassion does not measure, it ministers. It doesn't worry about the situation. It worries about the heart of the person, taking care of the inner person. And when Jesus goes with them, he goes against Jewish tradition. Now you might think, oh my gosh. But no, it's not God's law. It's Jewish tradition. It was in rabbinical writings. It was a teaching that not allowing them to go into a Gentile's home, but it was not God's law. It was man's tradition. Again, we remember God's law, but we remember what the rabbis did when they wrote all those other things, just to keep a hedge away from, so they don't lose the law. But what ended up happening with those traditions, they became law. And that's what happens in our own lives. Traditions, superstitions become the law of our lives, even though they aren't what God has to say. So the centurion probably knew that. He probably didn't want to put Jesus in a compromising position. He was a very respectful man, reverent to God. He also did not go himself, not to cause any defilement. He does not even want Jesus to enter into his home, so he runs ahead. He says, no, don't even come to my home. He even thinks of himself as not even worthy. Man, can you imagine this guy? Jesus thinking about this guy and thinking, oh man, I love this dude. He's so cool. He's reverent, loves the Lord. He loves God. And he doesn't even know him personally yet. And look at the reverence he has in his life. What humility from a Gentile. What humility from a non-Christ follower. He at least knows there's a God. I think of men like, I don't know, maybe I can say this, hopefully it's okay. I don't know if I'm going to offend anybody, but he's not in here, so I think of a guy like Josh, and he's so respectful. I don't know where he stands with the Lord, but he's such a respectful guy. The guy who works here. Always calling me pastor, always calling Ruben Mr. Vitale. He's just that type of a respectful guy. And man, what reverence, what respect. And I think about this centurion here, thinking about others, the reverence, the respect for God. And that's so missing. It's missing everywhere in our society today. That reverence, that respect. And so he stops Jesus, the centurion, and he just does something crazy. He says, he commands, he just asks him, hey, command that it be done. You don't even have to go over there. Just command that it be done. Just say the word, and I know he'll be healed. And he goes on to share that he's a man of authority, or under authority. He has men under his authority. Why does he share that? Well, he gives commands, and it'll be obeyed. He understood that concept. But what's different is, when he would say a command, men would obey. But when Jesus gives a command, everything obeys, including life and death. He's over everything. What does it say in John chapter 1, 1 through 5? It tells us, in the beginning was the Word, Jesus. And Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. Could it be that he knew who Jesus was? Could it be that the synagogue he built for the Jews, that he sat in there sometimes and heard the teaching of Isaiah and heard the teachings of the Messiah, and maybe he recognized and he thought to himself, man, is that him? And the reverence and the open heart, receptiveness took over. And he understood Jesus had the authority, not only with the people, but with with everything, including life. He had power over life and death. He knew there was no magic trick here, and he knew that the magician did not have to be present to pull it off. It was real. It was real. After the centurion says this, it tells us that Jesus marveled. Isn't that amazing? Why would he marvel? It means to wonder, to be astonished, to be in amazement. Why, if Jesus knows everything, why would he be surprised? Why would he be in astonishment? Why would he be in amazement? How can this be? Well, we're in our finite minds right now, aren't we? We don't understand the concept. But could it be that this was his humanness side? Could it be that he was tapping into that side? And he was just blown away by the faith of a non-Jewish person? I think it's very possible. We're not told. But then Jesus turns to the crowd and he tells everybody about this tremendous faith displayed right in front of them. And the servant was healed and Jesus wasn't even there. Jesus didn't set his hands on him. He didn't lay him down and push on him. He didn't hit his forehead. He didn't do any of that. He just commanded it from far away, and it happened. There are times where Jesus touched people. There are times when people touched Jesus. There are times when he spit in the ground and he put mud in people's eyes, and he did all these different things. It's very important that we remember that because he's diverse. We cannot put him in a box. We cannot say this is the way it's supposed to be done because we don't know. He does things differently. He's diverse. I love that about Jesus. He doesn't do the same thing over and over. And that's what we don't want him to do the same thing with us. Work in our lives differently, Lord. You ever thought about the cost of discipleship? The cost of discipleship. I think the centurion counted the cost. I think he went out on a limb. He risked everything. He risked his reputation. He risked his position, his pay, everything. He counted the cost of discipleship. If we read Luke chapter 14, verses 28 through 29, it says this: "For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost?" He's talking to the apostles at this time, right? Talking to his disciples. "Does not sit down first to count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.'" The cost of discipleship, in the cost of discipleship, faith is included in that cost. Have you counted that cost? That's the question. You've accepted Jesus. True. But how's your faith in Jesus? I like these three words that you guys, some of you may have read the devotion about Daniel chapter 3. And those three men getting ready to be put into the fiery furnace. And I love those three words they say, "But if not." But if not. Those are three words that should be in everybody's vocabulary as a Christ follower. What do I mean by that? Well, they're getting ready to be thrown in. And in Daniel 3, 17 and 18, it says, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king." Sounds like faith, right? And then they go on, though, and they say, "But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Now, are they showing doubt? But if not, I don't believe they are. Just because he does not do it, we begin to think that's doubt. But they don't. They continue on in faith. This is faith in God, and it's part of the cost of discipleship. I do not believe that this or the Bible teaches positive or negative confession. I do not believe that if I say, oh man, I hope I make it home today and I don't get in a car accident, I don't believe that it's going to happen. I know that people, when I say stuff like that, I know it bothers Christina. I hope I make it home today. Don't say things like that. I don't believe in the negative and positive confession. These were humble young men here who trusted God in every situation. It was like they were saying, hey, God can do this and we believe he can do it. But if not, no worries. His will be done. His will be done. Regardless of consequences, true faith confesses the Lord and obeys him. These three Jews here in this situation were men of faith, and they weren't presumptuous. They didn't know what God willed for their situation. They had no idea. They simply obeyed God and knew that he would do what was in their best interest. These three Hebrews knew God could save them, yet even if he didn't decide to do that, they would trust him anyway. This is how true faith is supposed to work and operate in our lives. Faith in Jesus includes counting the cost, but does not hesitate because of the cost. Faith in Jesus includes counting the cost, but does not hesitate because of the cost. I think about the example of building, of a new building. It's a good example. These are the things that the Lord's been dealing with me on. Okay, Lord, I know what the church budget looks like. I know what's coming in. I know what's going out. And I was talking to a pastor just yesterday. He called me up, Art Reyes in Rosemead. And he said, hey, he's asking me how things are going here. He stepped out. He has a nice building. And he was just asking me how things were going here. I told him what we have. I told him what we pay. I told him that they stored things here for us. And he goes, what, are you crazy? Why do you want to go anywhere else? You have it made. But see, he doesn't understand something. He doesn't understand what the Lord's telling me. So yes, I looked over the cost, but I also have to be obedient to what the Lord's telling me. Faith in Jesus includes counting the cost, but does not hesitate because of the cost. Yeah, we're comfortable. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to do anything else. But you know what? We're only here on Sunday for a couple of hours. The Lord has more he wants to do with this church, I believe. Now, if I have not heard from the Lord, if I have not sought him in prayer, if I have not asked for direction, and do not count the cost, and I go, then I'm presuming upon God. If I do not know what my books look like, and how much they're going to charge me for something, and I do it anyway, all I'm saying is, Lord, I'm going and you better pay for me. Isn't that faith? No, I don't believe so. I don't believe I'm in his will. If I do hear from the Lord, if I have sought him in prayer, if I've counted the cost, but I don't go because I'm fearful, then again, I'm not in his will. Understand? Makes sense? I have to be listening. See, he can do it, but will he do it? It's okay to say, but if not, and then rest in God's will. It's okay. It's okay to have that little doubt. It's okay to have that little unbelief, because he'll make that up. It's okay. It's not, oh God, I believe it so much, make it happen, and it's going to happen. How much power and faith I can put into my prayer. I love this. In the Valley of Vision, it says, help me to see how good thy will is in all, and even when it crosses mine, teach me to be pleased with it. If your will crosses over mine and you don't do what I think you ought to do, help me to be pleased with what you determine. If it be consistent with thy eternal counsels, the purpose of thy grace, and the great ends of thy glory, then bestow upon me the blessings of thy comforts. I want it all, Lord. Give it to me. It's okay to pray that. But it goes on and it says, if not, let me resign myself to thy wiser determinations. Lord, you have the best plan for me. This is what I want. But Lord, you have the best plan. So may I be okay with that. And you know what? That's true faith. The Bible, as we begin to wrap up here, and I won't take 20 minutes to wrap up, but the Bible tells us that Jesus only marvels at two things. One's here and one's in the book of Mark. He marvels at either belief or unbelief. Think about that for a moment. He marveled here at the belief of a Roman Gentile, not even in the fold. Faith this guy had. But he marveled at the unbelief of his own people in Nazareth. Remember when he went back over there? And they didn't receive him? And they sent him away? And what did Jesus do? He marveled at their unbelief in the Messiah, and he never went back to his own people. He went to the Gentiles now. Amazing. He only marvels at two things, belief and unbelief. This Gentile is willing to risk it all and put it all on the line for another person. That someone was considered a nobody in the world's eyes. But he was valued in his master's eyes, just like Jesus values us in his eyes. Jesus put it all on the line for each one of us. But what are we willing to do for him? What are we willing to do for him? Look at this Gentile Roman soldier doing for a servant who was not supposed to have any value at all. What are we willing to risk for our Lord? What has he asked us to do? Think about it. What has he asked you to do? And are you listening? And if you're listening, are you obeying? Those are the things you have to think about in your life. Warren Wiersbe writes this: if this Roman with very little spiritual instruction, think about that, very little spiritual instruction, had that kind of faith in God's word, how much greater our faith ought to be. We have an entire Bible to read and study, as well as nearly 2,000 years of church history to encourage us, and yet we are guilty of no faith or little faith. Paints a pretty interesting picture. If you have no faith or very little faith, there is a cure for that. There is a cure. It's called being honest with the Lord in prayer. And we see people do it in the Bible for our example. You know, this young man in Mark chapter 9, he has a spirit in him that throws him on the ground, tosses him on the ground. And the disciples couldn't cast the spirit out because they weren't fasting and they weren't praying, they weren't concentrating on what the Lord was telling them to do. And immediately, it tells us in Mark 9:25, immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. But then he goes on and says, help my unbelief. What a pure, honest prayer. Now he says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Does that mean that, and you know what's amazing? Jesus still healed him. Even though there was still unbelief. Jesus still healed his son. He said, Lord, what an honest prayer. Lord, I believe you can do all things. But in this situation, man, I just don't see it. So help my unbelief. That's okay to pray like that. It's okay to have those thoughts. It's okay to be pure and honest before the Lord. In Luke 17:5, the apostles asked Jesus a request. And they asked the Lord, increase our faith. You know, if you're struggling in that area, just come to the Lord. Forgive my unbelief. Increase my faith, Lord. Lord, I don't know how we're going to make it out of this situation. I just don't. How are we going to make it out of here? I don't understand. Lord, increase my faith. Help me get out of my own way and not make the wrong decision. Help me to wait upon you and not move until I know. See, we already start thinking of everything we can do, don't we? We start thinking of every other scenario. And then we implement, and then we go for it, and we're thinking we're doing all the right things, and we begin to trust in self. We begin to trust in our own efforts, and we think it's right, and it may even be working, but we've taken the faith out of Jesus and we've trusted in the things. When the Lord Jesus looks at you and me, when he hears your prayers, listens to your requests, think about this. Does he marvel? Does he marvel? Does he marvel when he looks at you? And if he marvels at you, what does he marvel at? Belief or unbelief?